Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. We will start off with a discussion today on the issue of corruption in Trinidad Tobago, and we promise this will be a very constructive as well as in-depth discussion, and then we will begin a Q&A session. So I do want to invite you to submit your questions through the question box on your screens throughout today's session, and I'll be back to moderate that session at the end of today's webinar. And now it's my pleasure to present to you the two people you came here to listen to today. We have as our guest Afra Raymond with us today, and I invite you all to please sign up to follow Afra Raymond at afraraymond.net. This is a man whose deep commitment to transparency shows up in the immense amount of research, investigation, and publication that he's done. So again, afraraymond.net. It's our pleasure to welcome you today, Afra. And of course, we have as your host, Caribbean economist Marla Dukharan, a woman that's always willing to raise the important issues and ask the tough questions. Marla deeply believes in holding ourselves as individuals and our leaders to account, and is the ideal person to be leading this discussion for us today. So Marla, I'm going to go ahead and unmute your mic, as well as you, Afra, and you are both on the broadcast.
Thank you. Thank you, Melissa, and thank you to all our guests who joined us for this webinar this morning. Afra, I mean, this is no TEDx talk and this is no black box production, but thank you so much for joining us. And like Melissa said, I mean, I am deeply grateful to you, and I congratulate you for all of the hard work that you do, and I try my best to read everything that you produce. I don't know, you clearly don't sleep, but you know, you are such an exemplary advocate for transparency and anti-corruption in our country, and I'm very, very honored to have you on this webinar this morning. So,
well, Marla, the pleasure is all mine. I don't want you to take it the wrong way, but the pleasure is all mine. This is excellent, and I thank you for organizing this event.
All right. So we had a recent release of the Corruption Perceptions Index.
Yes.
And I don't know where were you, know, it's one of those things that I think I will remember in time where you say, where were you when such and such happened? Like, where were you when 9/11 happened, or when the coup took place? I think I will always remember where I was when I first got word of the movement in the Corruption Perceptions Index for Trinidad and Tobago. And unfortunately, we had a bit of an incident in my family, and I was in the hospital. And and Matthew Bristow from Bloomberg messaged me and said, Marla, have you seen the index and the results of the Corruption Perceptions Index and how Trinidad has moved? I said, no, I have to confess, I haven't seen it, but what does it look like? And he told me this was the biggest move in across all countries this year, the biggest improvement, that is. So I said to him, it has to be a mistake. In the midst of fake oil scandals and, you know, ferries, and I mean, we can't even enumerate all of them. I said, how is that possible? Was there a change in the methodology? There has to be an error. So I want to hear from you, Afra. What are your thoughts around how we've moved? Because we're now on a score of 41. Which is an improvement over, let me see, I can't remember exactly.
Last year it was 35.
35. So we have a bit of an improvement, whereas previous year we had a bit of a deterioration. So it's kind of, we're kind of moving, we're bouncing around on this index, and I just want to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, Marla, thanks. The point is that we did have an improvement in the score from 35 in 2016 to 41 in 2017. But that has to be put in context two ways. Firstly, the score is a score of 1 to 100, of 0 to 100. And 100, a mark of 100 will be a perfectly transparent and corruption-free society. Those don't exist on the planet. But in fact, using conventional thinking, 50% or a mark of 50 would be a pass mark. And in fact, Trinidad and Tobago is still below 50%. Right. So that's the first thing we need to be aware of. The average score across the 180 countries surveyed is 43. So Trinidad and Tobago is even below the average. We're below 50 and we're below the average, even at the improved score of 41. And the other thing about the improvement is that a new agency reported into the system this time around. I think it was a democracy project reported into the system this time around. And the report of that agency actually gave Trinidad and Tobago a mark of 68. Statistically speaking, we call that kind of a mark an outlier. It's something that lays at the outer edge of our experience. And basically, what is happening there is that if you deduct that mark, if you take off that mark and you use the panorama methodology of deducting the highest mark and the lowest mark, you would actually end up in Trinidad and Tobago with a score that was not much different. So the people who had been surveyed in the past, I think it was 6 agencies surveyed in the past, their aggregate average was about 35 point something, so 35.2 or 35.3 or something. The inclusion of this fresh organization is what gave us this rise that has, of course, has been greeted politically. It's been greeted politically by, and you would expect that, regardless of who was in power, you would expect that kind of response from the political establishment that have been in power since 2015, that things have improved. But in terms of someone living and working in Trinidad and Tobago as a professional and as a transparency advocate, I don't actually believe that the perception has shifted that much. I've had a heck of a fight on my hands personally in respect of the public interest to get the information on the CL financial bailout, which has been conducted for 9 years now, and it's been conducted in secret, so we never knew who got paid. I won the court case on the 24th of January this year at the appeal court.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yep. And that was a court case fought in the public interest. The state's attorneys conceded, and we've entered a consent order. And I need to say to you that tomorrow is Wednesday. Tomorrow is 6 weeks we've had that judgment, and we haven't had any information yet. So we're trying, every day we try. Yesterday we were calling the state attorneys, and I'm saying all this, I hope you all are listening, whoever you are. Yesterday we were calling the state attorneys, they wouldn't take our call. In the 6 weeks we haven't had any proactive thing. Nobody has written us, nobody has phoned us, nobody has emailed us.
Even though there was a judgment in your favor.
Even though they went to court and conceded that they wanted to give the information, it's a sort of a schizophrenic situation where you want to give it, but you're not calling me and telling me to come for it. So I'm hoping that today, good sense and good conscience could prevail, and the information could actually be released, and that we could actually get onto the page, because when it's released, it's going to be published, and the information we're getting is the accounts for CL Financial, the group accounts, for 3 years, and we're also going to get the names of the persons who received money in the course of this immense bailout. $27.7 billion Trinidad and Tobago was spent. $4 billion US came out of a country this small, and it went to we don't know who, but soon we will. So for my own part, I was a little skeptical about that big improvement, although I'd really like it to be real.
I am eagerly waiting to hear how the sums and who these people are. I mean, I'm sure you're going to extempo for us on that.
It's possible. It's possible. It's possible. It's alleged.
I mean, so is this going to take us a step closer to the possibility of anybody being held accountable in this country for wrongdoing? I mean, when was the last time, Afra? When was the last time? Like I said, I think it was at the Chamber of Commerce not too long ago, that the last time I remember somebody being held accountable for fraud and corruption and so on was this judge who was put away when I was like in
he was a chief magistrate, Patrick Jagasa was his name.
Exactly, and then he
got 17 years jail, and he converted in prison and so on. Yeah.
Right. But was there anybody else after him in terms of a high-ranking government official or policymaker?
No, I don't know about anybody like that. And we have widespread development of something that we call impunity.
Of course, we have a culture of impunity.
And impunity is one of those things that is very pernicious. It's virtually invisible because it grows up around us as a cultural practice. But the example I always give when I'm speaking to this issue is the Stanford prison experiment, which was conducted in 1973. And some listeners, some viewers may be aware of what that is. But a professor of psychology at Stanford University in California decided to conduct an experiment, an extended role play, in which some of the exemplary students were selected to pretend to be prison guards for a period. I don't know if you're aware of this story. And other people were picked up. They were working in collaboration with the police. People were picked up, and they signed and they agreed to participate in this experiment as pretending to be prisoners. And some students and some members of the public pretended to be prisoners, and the experiment was supposed to run for 2 weeks, and the whole thing was to be filmed. And the one ground rule is that you could do somebody anything and nothing would happen to you. You wouldn't be penalized by law. And what happened is that the people who were the good students, these weren't rebels, these weren't difficult students, these weren't revolutionary students, they started to do acts of sheer wickedness to the people who were imprisoned. They were beating them, they were starving them, they were denying them water, they were torturing them. And in fact, after I think it was about 6 days, they had to stop the experiment. So the question the Stanford prison experiment was meant to explore is a sort of a mental, a psychological question. Where do our morals and our ethics come from? Are they innate, like hardwired into us, or do they develop out of a social and a cultural context? And the point is that even someone who's good, no, I've not read that book. Even someone who's good,
book, Afra.
Of course, even someone who's good, you put them in a position. You put them in a position where there are no consequences.
Yeah.
And all concepts of good behavior can break down.
Exactly.
And this is what all of this explanation I just gave for the last few minutes is what impunity is. We have a class of people who run the country. And our countries collectively in Barbados or in Trinidad and Tobago, or sometimes we use a phrase like the global south, we have a class of people who run our countries who can do as they please without any consequences. In other parts of the world, those consequences are exerted in bloody coups and revolutions and executions and so on. Trinidad and Tobago and Barbados is not there. We had little flirtations with it in the past. But if the corruption and impunity question is not dealt with, that is the sort of danger that we are flirting with as a society, because justice will be had. Justice will be had in certain ways. And it's not something that I relish. It will be nice to have justice established in an orderly fashion, in a transparent fashion, in accordance with law. We're a republic, and so on and so on. But at the moment, it does not appear to be working. No, so these are very pregnant questions that you're raising.
It's like, when you have a sovereign default, it's either you have an orderly default or a disorderly default.
Yes.
Either we have justice in an orderly fashion, the way you speak about, justice will be meted out in a more sort of a revolutionary fashion. But in that book, Dan Ariely does discuss quite a few examples of where, for example, where you have a system where you pay for your donuts in the office just by putting money in a jar.
Yes.
If you put a picture of eyes where the jar is, people tend to comply and pay and be honest, as opposed to not having a picture of eyes. If you feel somebody's watching you, you tend to be that much more honest or compliant at least. So yes, there are lots of behavioral issues behind this. And actually, when I was doing my MSc thesis, which I did on the issue of corruption a long time ago, I won't tell you how long ago, then you will know that I'm probably older than you. But I remember, reading about this whole subject about having moral sanctions. And that's one of the things that's missing in Trinidad. We don't have legal sanctions, but nor do we have moral sanctions. We're not our brother's keeper in the sense that we don't say to our peers and our relatives who engage in wrongdoing, from breaking the traffic light to throwing litter out of the car to anything beyond that. We don't hold them accountable and say, I really don't find you should do that. And that's wrong. And that's an element missing from us culturally. Therefore, and then also layered on top of that, you have wrongdoing at the highest levels of policymakers, as we see with the fake oil scandal, for example, the most recent one. I'm just drawing an example to the airport and all of these things. So then how do you tell the youth and the guys on the ground, so to speak, that they ought not to steal cars and they ought not to rob people and shoot people when they see very, very senior people in the government getting away with all kinds of wrongdoing? And it's the same, crime, and the crime is related, right? The white collar is related to violent crime. And that's another thing that we miss in Trinidad.
What I wanted to say in rejoinder with you, Marla, is that in fact, the whole question of the culture of selfish, irresponsible behavior is rooted not just purely as a cultural phenomena, but as an expression of individualism. We are in an age of rampant individualism. We are now reaping the whirlwind effectively of the capitalist triumph. So when the Berlin Wall fell, And let's go back 30 years. For those people who believe that nothing could change, and why bother? When I was growing up, when you were growing up, the Soviet Union and the Iron Curtain were realities. Those were
Yes.
superpowers. They had nuclear submarines. They put the first man in space. They had a dog in space. They have space stations. They had nuclear submarines. They had spy service. They had the whole 9 yards.
Yes.
It was a continental superpower. And in fact, over a long period of time, and there's no time in this discussion to get into how it happened, the Soviet Union eventually disintegrated and fell apart under the weight of its own contradictions. Part of what it is we're living now is there's now a triumphant capitalism, and that has found an expression in 2007 with the we call it the Great Depression Part 2. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's finding expression culturally in the behavior that you're speaking about, where people actually, the first, second, and third priority is your own behavior. So as a leader, this is not a question about your private life. As a leader, and in fact, in terms of your leadership decisions, the decisions are very often based on your own advancement and the advancement of your people. So I call it the 5 Fs. Sorry, there it is. Friends, family, and financiers find favor. Okay, so the 5 Fs is what is running the world now. 5 Fs, friends, family, and financiers find favor. We no longer have much of a discussion about public policy and what are the objectives of public policy. What is a progressive public policy? Where are we going to be in 20 years' time with this or with that? Very seldom do we get those discussions. And when they appear, they're quite remarkable for their rarity. And what's astonishing is when they do appear, you get almost reflexively from the other side, whoever the other side is, you get almost reflexively from the other side a response that attempts to drag the whole thing back down into the silo of some kind of a party political or almost an individualistic response. So we have a whole debate in the country right now about property tax. And,
yes.
and the political opposition is claiming to have been bamboozled and to have been I think the word was they were ambushed and so on and so on. But they were in power for 5 years with 29 seats and could have. For those people who are outside of Trinidad and Tobago, this is a group that was in power from 2010 to 2015 and could have, had they chosen to exercise their rights, which would have been constitutional rights in accordance with how Parliament is conducted, had they chosen to take measures to review the property tax, to fix it in the correct manner, to put things in place that were in accordance with what it is they felt was best for the country, they could have done that. They had 29 seats out of 41. They had enough parliamentary majority to have exercised a public policy series of choices. They did not do so. So we are now in a situation where a party with less, and I'm no supporter of that party either. This is the current government. A party with less political seats has made certain moves in Parliament, and they are now being told that they were ambushed and they could have overpowered and so on. So where's the public policy perspective in all of this? Yeah.
Yeah, they said this about FATCA legislation as well. But I want to take the conversation to solutions.
So where, sorry?
Solutions.
Yes.
So we have institutions like the FIU, the DPP's office, we have institutions and the judiciary, of course. To me, they are all in crisis. We know that the judiciary is in crisis with what has been happening with the Chief Justice. The FIU recently came out with another annual report. There's so many files that the FIU compiles with lots of information from the banking sector around suspicious transactions and so on, feeds this information to the DPP. How many people are brought to trial, are brought to the courts? All of the institutions that we have designed to maintain transparency and accountability and justice, to me, are in crisis in this country. Afra, what is the solution?
Well, one of the things we have to look at, which I mentioned in my speaking points, there are what I call the 3 I's. We have important independent institutions. The important independent institutions would include the Integrity Commission. They would include the Office of the DPP. They would include the newly established Office of Procurement Regulation. And those bodies are defined when we talk about an important independent institution. They're defined as having an important function in terms of detection and prosecution of white-collar crime. And the independent part of their description, so that was the important part, the independent part of the description comes from the fact that no outside person can give them instructions. The Prime Minister can't write to the DPP and tell them to charge this person or to investigate that person. You can send a report, you can make a suggestion, but there's no power to recommend. And therefore, what we have before us is something resembling a paradox. We have the important independent institutions which have critical functions to answer the question you were asking, Marla. And we have, as citizens and as concerned organizations in the country, we have to develop some way to make those organizations accountable. So for instance, let's talk about CL Financial. The Coleman report into CL Financial was finished at the end of June of 2016. Dr. Rowley spoke with the Parliament on the 1st of July 2016 about the Coleman report into CL Financial. And Dr. Rowley was very strong in his remarks because he was making a case in two limbs. The first case he was making is that what he read in the report and the members of cabinet had considered the report was horrifying. The phrase Dr. Rowley used in Parliament, I'll never forget it, criminal behavior of a kleptocratic nature. For those African brothers and sisters listening to us, criminal conduct of a kleptocratic nature had been noted in Coleman's report. The second limb of what Dr. Rowley was saying, and Dr. Rowley is our current Prime Minister in Trinidad and Tobago, the second limb of what Dr. Rowley was saying is that it was not possible to publish the report because to publish it would place the possible investigations and prosecutions of those people in jeopardy, because there's a whole question about negative pre-trial publicity and so on and so on. Now I ask you, that was nearly 2 years ago. Where is the DPP with this? Is it that nobody is to be charged? Are we waiting for people to die? What is the situation? And at the moment, I don't have any information. I've had no update from the DPP to say, listen, we investigated A, B, C, and D. We have 2 more things to investigate. We have 4 charges we're going to lay. Nothing. And that silence, sorry to say, that silence from those important independent institutions is a big part of the problem. And it's as far as I'm concerned, is a critical part of the code of silence. We have to break down this code of silence. This is our country. That is our money that was used to bail out CL Financial. And I want to know, obviously something went wrong. I want to know why it went wrong, who was responsible, and are they going to be held accountable? Are they going to face the courts? That is what I'm concerned with. Yes, so we need those organizations to be able to answer questions like this. I'm not accusing the DPP of anything odd, but I am saying you are a public institution. You're an important independent institution, and you have a responsibility to give us proper answers as to what is happening. You may not be able to give us all the details, but surely some information could be provided. We live in a democracy. We live in a republic. We have to do better.
So are you suggesting, therefore, that these important independent institutions are probably not so independent, or not as independent as we would like, or as they ought to be?
This is almost like a calypso, you know, how you misprint my calypso. I never said so. They're not. They're very independent, and to an extent so independent that they appear to be insulated from political intervention. I mean, the Integrity Commission had a bad breakdown in October of 2004, which is when they wrote directly under the chairmanship of Gordon Dean. I hope you're listening, Gordon. When they wrote directly to the Prime Minister of the country at the time, Patrick Manning, to ask Mr. Manning what they should do about a complaint about Dr. Rowley. That complaint was made by Ganga Singh, who was an opposition MP. And the Integrity Commission actually wrote a letter on the letterhead to the Prime Minister to ask him for directions about how to handle a complaint. And that was why they lost the court case Dr. Rowley brought against him, where the whole Integrity Commission resigned. That was the root of it. That letter was the one fatal document where they had actually compromised their independence. And we don't want them to compromise their independence. I would like them to be independent, but I would like them to be more communicative, because the public requires a degree of understanding about what is happening. What is happening, as you said in your opening remarks, Marla, we have a situation where year after year, decade after decade, people will loot the country. They have the opportunity to get old, they get wealthy, and they get famous, and they die, and we keep a big funeral, and it's a shame.
It's gone,
okay,
yes.
It's a shame, and that impunity is actually attacking the roots of good social order, because what you're doing, you're giving birth to the notion that anything goes.
Well, I always say that the beauty of Trinidad is that anything goes, and the problem with Trinidad is that anything goes.
Yes.
You know, it's a double-edged sword. But with respect to no, I mean, what I meant when I said, is it that these important independent institutions are not sufficiently independent? What I meant was, is it that they are, how should I say, is it that they are toothless dogs? Is it that their hands are tied and so for example, the fake oil scandal, and that reports were laid at the DPP's office late last year, if my memory serves me correct and my understanding of the situation, and yet still, despite the evidence, nobody's been charged. I mean, how do you explain that? And then how do we as NGOs, as citizens, pressure the DPP, or how do we get any kind of recourse? How do we raise an alarm that, listen, the DPP's office is probably not performing its function adequately?
Well, the DPP's office has complained over a long period, even before this current individual, Mr. Roger Gaspard, senior counsel, was DPP. The DPP's office has complained for a long period about being under-resourced and not having these sorts of qualities of staff that they need, the quality and quantity of staff that they need. But my understanding is that they have the ability to hire people in, whether there's people who are hired in to do forensic reports and so on. They have that possibility to do that. The real issue is that we have a situation of social respect, as far as I can tell. We have a situation of social respect where it'll be a very difficult thing to bring charges against important people. I think that will be a very difficult thing. It'll be a historic thing when we see it. We will see it, because this nonsense has gone on for a long time.
Exactly.
This nonsense about looting the country and so has gone on for a long time. Long time when Trinidad and Tobago was founded as an independent state back in 1962. There were 3 words in the national motto: is discipline, tolerance, and production. And I always say, and it's not
discipline, production, and then tolerance.
Okay, thank you. I got it all around. But I wanted to say that, in fact, what is happening now is that we have a different 3-word motto. And the 3-word motto we have, going back to your opening statement, Marla, is everything is everything. So, in fact, anything goes. And we need to get out of that. And one of the things I would like to see, trying to speak positively to your invitation, is that I would like to see the political parties that we have in our landscape actually going beyond the boundary. To paraphrase C.L.R. James, I'm a little bit tired of hearing the people from Party A speaking strongly about the wrongdoing and corruption and prosecutions and lawsuits, and all of the cases they're talking about are from Party B. And then if you're from Party B speaking, and all the cases they are talking about are from Party A. I long for the day. I long for the day when I can see prosecutions and investigations and arrests taking place within your own party, and you have the strength of character, the strength of purpose to interrogate your own members, your own comrades, and take that action that is necessary. Justice must not only be done, it must be seen to be done. It has to be even-handed. So I'm longing for that day. And I continue to be hopeful. Maybe I'm dreaming, but I continue to be hopeful that we could get that. You know?
No, I'm hopeful too, but it's what I was saying is about not being your brother's keeper, but being your brother's keeper to the extent that you hold your brother accountable, and we hold each other accountable, and there are moral sanctions for those that you know and love, not just those on the other side. And that's the kind of, and it starts with personal accountability as well. And that's something I'm going to have another conversation soon with Terence Farrell and Wendell Manwaran. I hope you will join us. in the
Yes.
audience for that one. But speaking of the audience, I think maybe we should take some questions,
Sure.
Melissa, if
Sure.
there are any questions from our audience members and our participants.
Absolutely. We've gotten quite a bit of questions. I want to start off with one that's along the same line you were just speaking about, moral sanctions. The question is that even with moral sanctions, in the absence of legal sanctions, how do we ensure enforceability of these sanctions if corruption comes from the top down?
Now, I agree that, legal sanctions, that's where we should be, but clearly we're not there yet. But my point is that, when I did that work for my MSc thesis, so you have those two types of sanctions. You have the legal sanctions and you have moral sanctions. The point is, if this one breaks down in terms of the judiciary and the legal process, at least if you have moral sanctions, there is less as that study that the Stanford study that Afra spoke about,
yes.
and also all of these studies that Dan Ariely cited in this book.
Mm-hmm.
Moral sanctions are very powerful, so much so that perhaps the burden on legal sanctions can be a lot significantly reduced. And I think that aspect of moral sanctions, it starts with us. It starts with us holding our friends and family to account when they break traffic lights and throw things out the window of the car and do the simplest little things that are wrong and are against the law, but everybody gets away with it because we have no enforcement in Trinidad. Afra, you have anything to comment on that question?
Not at the moment. I mean, the moral sanctions are important because they form a bedrock in terms of what you will and won't do, what you will and won't boast about, and so on and so on. It's a really important part of who we are.
Exactly.
There are things that, and we need to also be careful that we don't gild the past. What I'm trying to say is that there's a way that we can become romanticized and think that in the good old days it wasn't like this, and in the good old days it wasn't like that.
Yeah.
And the more I get in touch with history, and I spend a lot of time trying to read history, apart from reading the current things that I'm engaged on as campaigns and so on, and newspaper columns. The more I read history, the more I become aware that the past is actually a very mysterious place. The times that we long for. I mean, I have an older friend of mine who keeps insisting that Trinidad is a failed state. And it's awful, and sometimes he fluctuates to the point of wanting to have the colonials back and so on. And I say to him, so, okay, so now is a bad time. When would you rather have been alive? Would you rather have been alive at night? No, they went right past. They went right past. I think they're going down the street. Back to headquarters. But seriously, when would you rather have been alive? Would you rather have been alive in 1950? Was it 1920 as your preferred year? And it's very interesting because we have a difficulty. We are here now, we are in the present, and we have to fight from where we are. But we need to fight for an improved future, understanding that the past was not perfect. People in the past had to grapple with imperfection and lies and what we call versions, and some of those versions made it into the history books. So they look as if that's how the good thing was and that's how the good thing was. We have to fight from where we are. And I think the moral and the social point that was just made is a very important one in terms of how we develop our understanding going forward and what people consider to be acceptable behavior and unacceptable behavior.
Agreed. Melissa, any more questions?
Oh, we've got quite a bit of questions here. A lot of them are pointing to the issues of enforcement and of power and really who can do something about this. So, I got a comment that says that DPP has no investigative power. They have to, that's the responsibility of the police. The FIU has to wait for the outcome of police investigations. Just if you can comment on this a little bit.
Sure.
The other question I think is related is also these independent institutions. Who appoints the members of these institutions? Just to try and understand a little bit the panorama.
Okay. Well, the independent institutions in our constitution, they are appointed in terms of the DPP is appointed by the Prime Minister, which is an appointment that's made after consultation with the opposition leader. The Integrity Commission and the Office of Procurement Regulation are appointed by the President after consultation with the Prime Minister and the leader of the opposition. And of course, one could drill down and come to a place where one realizes that in Trinidad and Tobago, our president is largely a ceremonial office. And the president is not an elected head of government and head of state like in other countries. We have a head of government that is called the prime minister, and we have a president who's largely ceremonial, who's the head of state. The president as the head of state is appointed by the parliament. So in other words, to put it simply, the president is appointed by the party with the most votes in parliament. So one could put forward a case and say that the president is also a political appointee. But let's drill down another layer again and make the point about how situations and power affects people. Because what we've had in the past in the country, and it's been noted sometimes, but not all the times, we've had situations where, in fact, people have been elected president by the parliament. And one would have thought they would have gone along a particular line, and they have taken up lines of surprising independence, in some cases, surprising inflexibility in other cases. And in fact, once someone is insulated from prosecution, because the president's office is insulated from prosecution, once someone is insulated from prosecution, is in possession of the highest office in the country, and is in possession of that degree of security, a kind of a startling independence, and sometimes not always in pleasant places, could flower, and you get strange things happening from the office of the president. Coming to the point about how the organizations function, I could say that the DPP's office does not have the power to investigate. Yes, they do have to rely on the police, and the police have challenges in terms of the quality of investigators to look into some of these sophisticated financial crimes. And the FIU, because someone mentioned the FIU earlier on, I think, Melissa, you mentioned that in your earlier stanza. The FIU, which is the Financial Intelligence Unit, will be gathering information about suspicious activity reports and so from within the financial system, collating those and passing on suspicious activity reports to the Financial Investigation Bureau, FIB. And it's not a joke, it actually is called the FIB, the FIB. I didn't make that up. The FIB is actually a part of the police service that's attached to the FIU, and the FIB does the investigations. Now, there's a case I was involved in, which I did as a newspaper columnist, and when I was president of JCC, which is the Eden Gardens case. And that case was one that we reported to law enforcement, including the FIU. And I happen to know that it's been taken up by all the relevant agencies. It's made its way to the court as a civil lawsuit. And I think that's an interesting development under the current administration, because how that has manifested itself is that the previous approach was one in which one was trying to find a way to put people behind bars. So you would take up a prosecution for a criminal offense against your political opponent, which I spoke about earlier on. And that prosecution would wend its way through the court. So in the case of the Piarco Airport scandal that you mentioned earlier, Marla, there's been a preliminary inquiry going on for 19 years. The people in the United States who are part of that large-scale act of grand corruption would have been convicted,
serve their time,
been imprisoned, serve their time, and come out. We are still in the preliminary inquiry stage, and I wouldn't be surprised if some of the people die. If some people die before the cases actually get started. Now, what the current administration has done, and congratulations are due whenever there's a positive development. What the current administration has done is that they have taken a different approach with Eden Gardens, because criminal investigations, in my opinion, would have been warranted in that case, but they did not wait for the police. They did not wait for the DPP. They launched a civil lawsuit in terms of the large-scale fraud committed within HDC by the HDC board, and the then Minister of Housing and Urban Development, Dr. Rulal Munilal, he is listed also as one of the people being sued in that lawsuit and so on. So in fact, there was actually a different approach taken in this case, and the difference, to explain to listeners why it's decisive, is that in Trinidad and Tobago law, as a republic and with certain constitutional protections, if you are facing a criminal prosecution, there is a scope for you to raise issues, defensive issues, that in fact is extensive. In a civil matter, we have something called the CPR, the Civil Proceedings Rules, which was put in place in about 95 or 96, which make it a very efficient way to at least sue somebody. You can do a lawsuit and have it over in a year or two. And the scope for delaying tactics and adjournments is very, very limited. Therefore, I am I am quite pleased that the current administration has seen fit to start with a civil prosecution, a civil lawsuit, as opposed to criminal lawsuits. So there's a difference has emerged. I think it's a positive difference. And when those things happen, we have to recognize them and say thank you for trying something different. Because we can't keep trying the same thing.
And expect a different result. Yes.
Exactly.
So at least this way somebody can be held accountable if even in a reduced fashion is what you're saying.
Yes.
Yeah. Good. That's an interesting development, and so congratulations due to the current administration for doing that. Melissa, any more questions?
Absolutely. How do we get some of these people convicted is one of the things that keeps showing up in the questions. And related to that, have there been any positive developments in recent years regarding legislation on corruption?
Well, Afra, I guess what you just mentioned about going to the civil courts instead of the criminal courts.
That's a positive development. The biggest development I would mention, to give a succinct answer to that question, that's a really important question. The biggest development I would mention is the passing of the procurement law, which is something myself and my colleagues fought for years. That law is now passed. The Office of Procurement Regulation Board has now been appointed a month ago. I was on radio yesterday with the chairman of the board, Mr. Munilal Lalchan, and that board is putting the regulations in place and putting the administrative apparatus in place to start doing their important work. And there are some important features of the new procurement system that deserve our attention. So I would outline some of those features in an attempt to answer the question that was raised by the last questioner. The first feature is that the old siloed approach is discarded. So once there's a transaction involving public money, a transaction, not receiving public money or spending public money, any transaction involving public money or the disposal of public property, it comes under the umbrella of the procurement regulator. Therefore, public-private partnerships, like the sandals we keep talking about, public-private partnerships like the Hilton Hotel in Trinidad, the ferry to Tobago, okay? All of those things come within the regulation. State enterprises, ministries, local authorities, they all come within those arrangements.
Okay.
In addition, so the first thing is that any transaction involving public money is broadly defined with a modern dynamic definition. Thirdly, we have a situation where, in fact, there are swift proceedings. The whole proceedings, if a complaint is made about that transaction or this tender, the whole proceeding, the whole investigation takes place in 28 days. It isn't something that will drag on. So, for example, in the case of the DPP, this thing is dragging on now. In July, it'll be 2 years. You have to make a written finding in 28 days and publish the finding. So the whole thing is online and transparent. The tender opportunities are published. Tender invitations are published, the tender responses are published, the investigations are published.
Okay.
If indeed, so we're getting on to the fourth point now, if indeed after investigation a fault is found with a particular contractor, Bob is a contractor and Bob was at fault because Bob was actually offering a bribe to somebody in Wassa. That was alleged and it was found to be so. If indeed that is the case, Bob can be disbarred, and the word we use is cross-disbarment, because at the moment in Trinidad and Tobago law, someone could be a contractor, that same Bob could be a contractor doing bad work for TNTech. TNTech had to rebuild things that Bob built. Bob was found to be paying bribes to TNTech. He bought a car for somebody working in TNTech, and TNTech decides they won't use Bob anymore. TNTech is Trinidad and Tobago's Electricity Commission. And that happens right now. Our state enterprises and state agencies do make decisions like that, except in the current scenario, that bad contractor called Bob can continue to do work for the water authority, for the telephone authority, for regional corporations, for ministries, because in fact, the decision of TNTech to stop using Bob is not binding on the other agencies, and the other agencies may literally not even know.
There's no communication.
Other than by coincidence. Under the new system, all of that information is agglomerated, and the Procurement Regulation Board has the power to make a cross-disbarment finding. So in fact, if you are found to be in breach after a proper investigation, you've had the opportunity to put your case, you could be disbarred from any state work for up to 10 years. So it's a very serious penalty. And the last point I want to make in terms of giving listeners some information about the new things in Trinidad and Tobago on the procurement law, the last point I want to make is in relation to the penalties as they apply to the civil servants and the public officials. The penalty I just described related to the private entities that may have been involved in wrongdoing. So the penalty is called cross-disbarment.
Right.
In relation to the public officials working in the system, the entire difficulty we have been grappling with is a difficulty around this thing we call the corporate veil. If we pay attention to TV news and we look at reports coming out of Wall Street or the City of London, you see that this big bank or that big finance company was found guilty of this breach of that regulation or this license. They paid a big fine, and it's Wells Fargo and it might be Barclays Bank and so on and so on. And you hear about it and you feel hopeful and you think, but at least they caught somebody. But the fact of the matter is, and the big question, the unanswered question is, why does it keep happening? If it's that well organized and the investigators up there are so advanced and these people are paying these huge fines, why does it keep happening? And why it keeps happening is there's a fiction at the heart of the whole thing. The fiction is a fiction that the company, and it's a fiction that's live in our legal learning, our jurisprudence. The fiction is one that in fact the company is a separate person legally. So if the company had a license and the company broke the law, and therefore the company is liable to pay the fine. But the reality is, the company could have done none of those things if the chiefs in the company had not sat together and decided that we're going to do this, and we're not going to declare that, and we're going to list this as if it came out of the Cayman Islands, and we're going to do all of those things. It wouldn't have happened. Therefore, our approach in creating this law was an approach that said we are not going to attach importance to the corporate veil. If you are a state agency or a ministry, and you are transacting in public money or you are disposing of public property, that state agency, that ministry must have a named procurement officer, and name a biological person.
Right.
With a name, an address, a date of birth, a DP number. That person is the person who signs. And if a finding has been made, let's go back to Bob. If a finding has been made that Bob the contractor did something wrong with that agency, Bob could be disbarred, but the agency is now liable to penalties. And unlike the current regimes that are exercised by the SEC and the Integrity Commission and different sorts of agencies, where someone could just write a check and pay a fine, all of the penalties within the procurement law are custodial. So in fact, you will be going to prison. There's no and or a possibility of getting 6 months prison. The minimum imprisonment is 12 months. So in fact, the position of procurement officer within these state agencies transacting in public money is a very serious, responsible position, and you need to take proper steps to satisfy yourself that what you're doing is in accordance with the law. The scope for funny business is going to be reduced, and the penalty for funny business is going to be expanded. And it's by creating a proper balance between those two things that we have the possibility of turning this ship around, which is the question Melissa was asking.
And the 28-day window is one that ensures that this does not drag on.
Yeah.
And so
wow, we don't want it carrying on into the future. Yeah, we don't want that anymore.
This is a powerful thing. Congratulations to you and your colleagues on
yeah, and thank you, and we have support. We have full support for the procurement regulation colleagues, and hope that they can get on with this very important work. They've been given an opportunity to be the pioneers in this work, and they certainly have my, as I said to them yesterday at the close of the interview, they have my critical support. Critical is a decisive word, but support was also in there. So you have critical support from us,
Nice. Melissa, do we have time for any more questions?
There's so many questions here. I am going to ask one final question, and then I'll ask Afra to go ahead and give us the main thing he wants everyone to leave here with today. Marla, I've also got some questions. If you could hold the book up again that you had recommended earlier, so that people can look it up online and find out where to get it. That is The Honest Truth About Dishonesty.
Yes.
Afra, the final question.
This is a good book.
Yeah.
The final question I have for you today is just regarding corruption in Trinidad. Is there an anatomy of corruption? Are there some sectors that are more affected than others, or is there something that's moreover infected throughout?
Let me just make one small point on that, Afra. Of course, you know more than I do, but I remember reading a paper done about this, and what they found was that the energy sector is actually, and I guess the TTEITI would be testament to this as well, that the energy sector, which of course is our most important sector, has the least incidence of corruption, and the other sectors are the ones where we do have much more corruption. But go ahead, Afra.
Yeah, the point I was going to make is that in fact the problem is widespread, and one of the misunderstandings we have to grapple with, even within our own minds, is the notion that corruption is something that is rooted in the public sector, or that is isolated to the public sector. First, to begin with, public sector corruption is actually fed by private sector participants who are prepared to pay bribes and inducements and nepotism and all of that stuff, okay?
Yeah.
But the second point is no less important, and the second point is that in fact, even within a private sector scenario, which I've written about extensively, even within a private sector scenario, there is extensive corruption that takes place in the private sector that has nothing to do with any political party. Whether it's the finance sector, you mentioned oil and gas, construction, because even when private people are building buildings with contractors and surveyors and architects, and things happen. Okay,
Yes.
so the question is really a widespread one, and generally speaking, an inability to seem to be able to get our fingers around the throat of it. And I'm hopeful that the Office of Procurement Regulation gives us an opportunity to have a fresh start on that front. And some of the work that we're doing and some of the work that you are doing, Marla, could help us to getting a fresh start on this.
I hope so. I hope so. So Melissa, are we out of time now?
We had booked 45 minutes, so we are over time. But we still have a lot of people on the call. So if you want to go ahead and make any final statements, I think this is a good time to go ahead and start wrapping up.
You go ahead,
Marla, you want to say something?
You're my guest. You go first.
I wanted to say that in fact, we need to develop. Yes, we need to develop a proper understanding in our young people and our employees that in fact ethical conduct and behavior as professionals and as people in the workplace actually matters. You do get an impact because of your behavior. It's interesting, particularly coming from a small society, that people will actually know what you stand for and what you don't stand for, and some opportunities will never come your way, and you would wonder why that is. And sometimes it's rooted in the conduct that either you participate in or you condone. So you have a choice to make in terms of how you organize yourself.
Yeah.
And it's never too late to try to improve or to change the way you do things. So I will leave it like that for now. I thank you for the opportunity, Marla, and this has been a really nice webinar. Very good.
Thank you for joining us, Afra. I really appreciate your time, and I know our viewers appreciate you. I want to just say that, you know, in the work that I've done in looking at corruption and reading about it and researching it, and in my thesis work, I remember the question and the title of my thesis is that, is corruption a curse or a necessary evil in the development trajectory of a country? And corruption is one of those things that, as you rightly pointed out at the beginning of the webinar, it's something that is inescapable to different degrees, right? There is no country that is completely free of corruption. However, my findings showed me that basically it is one of those sort of stepping stones and one of those periods that you go through in a development process. Therefore, the more developed you are, meaning socioeconomic development, the less likely you are to have corruption at this degree, because your institutions will be stronger and will be able to address any corruption that arises. My fear is that we are devolving in Trinidad, and we are becoming less developed just by virtue of the fact that, to me, corruption seems to be getting worse and seems to be becoming even more ingrained and isn't being addressed at any level, because we have this culture of impunity. And that's really why I've been placing more attention on this now, because I have a fear that we are devolving rather than evolving, and we are taking steps back in our development path as opposed to making progress along a development path. And interestingly, I just want to mention something about Barbados. Barbados is supposed to be, as you know, in the English-speaking Caribbean, the beacon of institutional quality and transparency and so on. Do you know? And Barbados has the oldest, supposedly the oldest Westminster Parliament in the Western Hemisphere. Barbados' Parliament was dissolved automatically last night at midnight for the first time in history, because the government did not prorogue Parliament and then announce an election date. Therefore, they have no functioning Parliament, no functioning legislature, and there is no election date. You know, and to me, this is symptomatic of a wider problem that we have in the Caribbean. Our institutions seem to be weakening and crumbling, and it frightens me, because I have children and I would like to leave a solid future for them in the country that we are born in and that we love. But you know, when you see these kinds of things happening, it makes you fear for the future. And so what I would like to leave, just along your point as well, with our listeners, is that we really have to take personal accountability and responsibility for our own actions and for those we love and those around us and at home and at the workplace as well. And we really need to make noise when we see these things. Find your voice and raise your voice when we see these kinds of things happening. And let's be each other's keeper and be the keeper of our nation and take ownership of what this is. This is our nation. This is nobody else's. Nobody going to come here and fix it for us. We have to fix it. And that's really what I want. That's the message that I want to leave today. So thank you so much, Afra. I can't tell you how much I appreciate your time. And I appreciate the time of all of the viewers and listeners with us today. Thank you so much. And thank you, Melissa, for making all of this happen with your pixie dust and your voice of God, and being the one the chief cook and bottle washer, making everything happen. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you.
All right. Well, we've come to the end. Have a wonderful afternoon, and thank you very much for joining us.
Okay. All the best.